Welcome to Pasadena Monthly, formerly known as News Wrap Local. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. Thanks for being here. Happy Arab American Heritage Month. After taking a look at what's been going on in Pasadena this past month, we'll speak with our guest, author and podcast host, M.G. Lord. But before we get started, let's check out these Pasadena Media News Briefs.
This year, LitFest in Medina is celebrating books that have made a difference in the community and the world, their authors, and their influence. This event is free and open to the public, beginning May 2nd with dramatic readings and discussion, then moving into the week of May 6th and 7th with more readings, workshops, panels, Q&As, and other literary events. For more information and a fully detailed itinerary of events, please visit litfestinmedina.org.
On Monday, March 13th, the City Council unanimously approved a proposal for a work group to join Los Angeles County in the search to find suitable properties in Pasadena for a potential mental health facility. Pasadena has its own health department, but it's Los Angeles County that is responsible for providing mental health services to Pasadena residents. Mayor Victor Gordo said, "During the pandemic, we saw the need for mental health services and primary health care services grow exponentially." Gordo added, "I'm hopeful this partnership will lead to a physical location in our city that provides primary health care services and the mental health services that are so desperately needed."
City Manager Miguel Marquez has announced new promotions and appointments of Pasadena City staff. Jennifer Page is now the Director of Planning and Community Development. Tiffany Jacobs-Quinn is now Pasadena's Director of Human Services. Alex Suto is the new Deputy City Manager. Jennifer, Tiffany, and Alex have over 40 years of combined experience with the City of Pasadena, said Marquez. "I'm excited to welcome them to the city's executive leadership team." Additionally, the City of Pasadena has two new Assistant City Managers, Brenda Harvey-Williams and David Reyes. Brenda and David have been serving as department directors for the last several years, and over the last year, both have served as acting assistant city manager, said Marquez. Their assistance has been invaluable to the city and to the city manager's office, where they lead with their passion to serve the residents of Pasadena.
Let's turn next to our lightning round of news updates. 1. Superior Court Judge Mary Strobel ruled in favor of the city in a lawsuit brought by the California Apartment Association, which sought to invalidate Measure H, the rent control charter amendment approved by voters last November. CAA said it's keeping its options open and it has 60 days to file an appeal. The ruling enabled the City Council to move forward with appointing the 11-member Rental Housing Board, which will be responsible with administering and enforcing the provisions of Measure H. The board is made up of 7 tenant members, one from each council district: Manuel Nahara, District 1, Diane Romero Chavez, District 2, Brandon Lamar, District 3, Barbara Pitts, District 4, Yaneli Soriano Santiago, District 5, Ryan Bell, District 6, and Deborah Dunlap, District 7, with Aaron Markovitz appointed as the tenant alternate. And 4 at-large members: Arnold Siegel, Lourdes Gonzalez, Adela Torres, and Allison Henry, with Peter Dreyer appointed for the at-large alternate seat. The board's first meeting will be held on or before May 17th. 2. Pasadena released the final Office of Independent Review report into the officer-involved shooting of Anthony McLean in August 2020. The report gave 27 procedural and policy recommendations for the Pasadena Police Department, including several that were already adopted. The review found issues with the timing of the department's investigations, the management of the crime scene, the involved officer's ability to move through the crime scene and interact with other officers prior to being sequestered, a delay in obtaining officer statements, and officers viewing their own or others' body-worn camera footage. Meanwhile, the city reached a $3.2 million settlement with Chris Ballou over his arrest in 2017 at an Altadena gas station that left him with a broken leg in exchange for dismissing his federal civil rights lawsuit. 3. The 710 Stub Working Group, known as the Reconnecting Communities Advisory Group, held its first meeting this month. The group named Danny Parker as the chair and Remy De La Peza as the vice chair. The group will provide guidance and advice to the City Council regarding the redevelopment of the nearly 50-acre 710 stub, which Caltrans relinquished to the city last summer. The group will meet on the third Wednesday of every month at 6:30 p.m. in council chambers, with the next meeting being held on May 17th. The city is currently accepting requests for ideas bids for consultants on the project and will soon issue a request for proposals for displacement researchers. 4. Mayor Victor Gordo was recently appointed by the council to serve as Pasadena's representative on the Burbank-Glendale-Pasadena Regional Housing Trust Fund Board, which has been allocated $23 million from the state of California. The city's housing element, recently approved by the state, includes the goal to build at least 9,429 new housing units in Pasadena by 2029. Meanwhile, Pasadena will also receive a $4.65 million grant from a federal fund called the Continuum of Care Competition Awards to help address homelessness. 5. Regal Cinemas, the largest movie theater chain in the United States, said it will reopen the Paseo ArcLight movie theater. The 14-screen theater was closed 3 years ago when the pandemic started. The announcement came shortly after Regal's parent company, Cineworld, filed its reorganization plan to exit Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which it plans to do in the coming months. In January, Cineworld announced the closure of 39 Regal locations across the country. The Paseo Theater will reopen in late 2023. Speaking of Paseo, the Lightbringer Project announced that Paseo's new owner, Ani Group, will not provide the previous financial and labor resources needed to host the annual Chalk Festival in June, and therefore the 30th annual festival will be canceled this year. 6. The Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, will visit Pasadena on May 30th. The visit is reportedly not related to the city's efforts to have a new Navy vessel named after Pasadena, but Mayor Gordo says those efforts continue. As this show is reported, the current USS Pasadena, a nuclear attack submarine commissioned in 1989, is expected to be deactivated sometime before 2024. Two previous USS Pasadenas were a cargo ship from 1918 to 1919 and a light cruiser from 1944 to 1950. Also, Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Transportation Policy Christopher Coase recently visited Pasadena and toured the 710 stub by helicopter after the city received a $2 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Reconnecting Communities pilot program, which will fund studies of a community-driven process to plan for the future of the 710 stub. 7. Funding has been secured for the Avenue 64 Complete Streets project. The project includes the installation of a landscaped roundabout on Avenue 64 and Burley Drive. The project will also include stamped concrete asphalt at the intersection of Avenue 64 and Cheviot Dale Drive, and, during a second phase, traffic calming curb extensions at the intersection of Avenue 64 and Glen Ullin Drive. Pavers will also be installed on limited sections of the center divider lane. The project intends to calm traffic and improve pedestrian accessibility. Subject to council approval in August, the construction of the roundabout will begin in January and take about 6 months. Burley Drive will be closed with resident access only during much of the construction. Also, in lieu of the canceled Metro L Line California Boulevard grade separation project, 9 transportation projects totaling more than $180 million were recently approved and funded to improve mobility in and around the 710 corridor region and enhance various modes of transportation. Construction will begin next year, and the timeline for some projects could last up to 10 years. 8. The City Council extended the Rose Bowl Stadium and Brookside Golf Course operating agreement with the Rose Bowl Operating Company, which was set to expire this July, for another 2 years. At a recent meeting, Rose Bowl General Manager Jens Wyden said the resurgence of golf, the increase in music festivals, and new ticketing agreements have put the Rose Bowl in a more stable financial situation, although challenges remain. The stadium expects to finish this fiscal year with a balance of $10 million. Its operating budget is forecast to decline annually through fiscal year 2027, but will remain balanced. 9. The City Council approved the purchase of the old Kaiser site on North Lake Avenue for $12 million in a partnership with LA County, which will provide half of that price with the city's American Rescue Plan Act funds covering the other half. The LA County Board of Supervisors plans to vote on joining the purchase at their May 2nd meeting. The city and county are exploring the feasibility of co-locating affordable housing and mental health outpatient services at the 2.3-acre property, which has been vacant for 13 years. 12,000 square feet of the space will be maintained by the city. And 10. Bob Stain, the 86-year-old owner of the Coffee Gallery Backstage music venue in Altadena, has been hospitalized. That venue has also been closed permanently, with all future performances canceled. Stain is a local music legend who helped launch many careers over the past half-century plus. He was the co-owner of the Ice House from 1961 to 1978. He has owned coffee galleries since 1998. Let's patch in our guest, MG Lord. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Justin.
MG Lord is the host of Blood, Sweat, and Rockets, a new podcast from LAist Studios about early JPL history, and the author of Astro Turf, The Private Life of Rocket Science, a family memoir about Cold War aerospace culture and JPL's dark origin story. She is also the author of Forever Barbie, the unauthorized biography of a real doll, and The Accidental Feminist, How Elizabeth Taylor Raised Our Consciousness, and We Were Too Distracted by Her Beauty to Notice. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Hollywood Reporter, and LA Times. A graduate of Yale, Lord was for 12 years a syndicated political cartoonist based at Newsday, and she's an associate professor of the practice of English at USC. So you've been looking at this story of JPL's early history for a long time with now the podcasts and first your book. Start by telling us about your book, AstroTurf, and your personal history relationship with JPL.
Well, I originally didn't go to JPL in a cheery mood, in addition to the dark origin story of the actual lab itself, my own relationship with it had to do with my father, who was a rocket engineer. And a long time ago, in the late 60s, when I was between the ages of like 10 and 14, my mother was dying of cancer. And my father, I'm an only child, but my parents were much older. My father couldn't deal with this, so he disappeared into the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, into the Mariner Mars 69. And after Forever Barbie sold extremely well, publishers kind of gave me carte blanche to do any project I wanted to do. And it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to spend that much time on. And I realized, I want to know more about this Jet Propulsion Lab. I want to find out where that damn man went. And actually, the New York Times, I think, accused the book of being an odyssey of forgiveness. But when I started out, that was not my intention. I just found that I was as beguiled by what the engineers and scientists did there as my father had been so many years ago.
Mm-hmm. And tell us about this new LAist Studios podcast. Well, fairly new, came out a few months ago. Blood, Sweat, and Rockets, and also how it came about.
My understanding actually is that a donor with ties to aerospace gave a significant amount of money to create a podcast about some aspect of aerospace culture. Various ideas were pitched, and LAist decided, for really good dramatic reasons. I mean, you can't get better characters than the gang who founded JPL. They decided to run with this story. I was not initially involved in the project, except the executive producer is someone I knew from a couple years earlier when she was working for Latino USA, and she did a piece on the Frida Kahlo Barbie, and my other area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
She needed someone to narrate kind of a history of that sordid little 11.5-inch object. So we had worked together in a way on that. And she noticed in the proposal for the JPL podcast that so much of the good details were from my book. And she asked me if I wanted to be involved as host. Because I'd been given a long interview, I guess she assumed, my annoying nasal supercilious voice would be right for this project.
And why do you think this story is important, and particularly in Pasadena?
Well, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is a real jewel in the crown of Pasadena's Chamber of Commerce, or La Cañada Flint Ridge, the larger Pasadena area. And one could actually argue that the birth of American rocketry took place in the Arroyo Seco in 1936, when two of our key figures in this JPL origin story, Frank Molina, a graduate student at Caltech, and Jack Parsons, um, a rocket enthusiast with ties to occult religion,
Mhm.
teamed up and did a proof of concept test at the Devil's Gate Dam in the Arroyo Seco. And again, because of the connections of Parsons to a so-called satanic faith, the Devil's Gate Dam was not accidental, nor was the date of this test, Halloween 1936.
Mhm. Yeah, it's known as the nativity scene of JPL, that famous photo of that group, which became known as the Suicide Squad, of course,
Yes.
blowing things up on the Caltech campus. As you mentioned, Frank Molina, Jack Parsons, there's lots of interesting characters in this story, but those are sort of the two main characters. Tell us a little bit more about Jack and Frank.
Yeah, I would also probably add Chen Shushen,
Mhm.
but we can talk about him later, since
Yeah.
the initial experiments were grounded in Frank Molina's, grasp of theoretical mathematics. And Parsons was not a scholar. He didn't even have an undergraduate degree, but he had kind of an intuitive understanding of chemistry and had worked, in industry as a chemist. And he had a sidekick, Ed Foreman, who could construct anything out of stuff found in junkyards. And that was also essential for building the equipment that was needed to test these early prototypes of rocket engines. There weren't test stands that you could use. In fact, rocketry wasn't even a legitimate field. Many of the professors at Caltech scoffed at Frank Molina when he talked about doing a PhD thesis on rocket propulsion. But not another, I think, important figure in this, Theodor von Karman, a Hungarian aerodynamicist who, when other people, sneered at Molina, like rocket propulsion, that's preposterous, von Karman took a gamble, and placed a bet on Frank Molina. Not on the sidekick Parsons, but Parsons was absolutely essential to the early experiments.
Yeah, and then they go on, of course, to develop these JATOs, jet assisted takeoff rockets, to that the military used in World War II to have planes take off faster, and that of course led to them founding Aerojet and JPL. Although Jack Parsons wasn't really institutionally involved in the JPL aspect of it.
JATOs, a plane could take off on a very short runway, and but Caltech was not in a position to become a military contractor, which is why this, Aerojet had to be incorporated in Delaware or whatever. Von Karman was one of the original partners, Parsons, and over time, shall I get ahead of myself with a little bit of the Molina story?
No, that's fine. I was also going to ask, like, how the careers of these two men, got derailed for different reasons as well.
Parsons is probably better known than Frank Molina.
Mhm.
And in both cases, their, I guess, extracurricular activities caught up with them after the war. Parsons, I think, has gotten more public attention because he was involved with the Ordo Templi Orientis, this I guess, occult religion founded by Aleister Crowley, or shall I say, Diary of a Drug Fiend author, Aleister Crowley. And I think he's gotten more attention because certainly in Los Angeles and probably, throughout the United States and maybe the world, there's a fascination with satanic cults, occult religions, and sex magic, which the podcast goes into. And I mean, not just this sort of antichrist stuff, but even Amy Semple McPherson founded her church here. California is a place, Los Angeles is a place that seemed to have been, particularly in the early 20th century, kind of welcoming to these non-traditional religions. That's air quote religions.
It's clear that Jack Parsons tends to get more credit than he deserves when it comes to JPL and early U.S. rocketry, and Frank Molina tends to get less credit than he deserves. But both of them were pretty intricately involved in the beginning, and then their careers got derailed. Frank Molina for these
Right,
communism ties, and Jack Parsons, as you mentioned, for these weird occult religion, scientist by day and occultist by night thing that he was doing.
I would say Molina got literally very involved with the so-called God that failed. His son finally, his family, Molina's family, had always said that he was not a communist, but he was. I mean, he was a member of Professional Unit 122 of the Communist Party. It was based at Caltech. Other members of that communist cell, which was also kind of a discussion group, a place where intellectuals at a university could come to talk about ideas. It existed, and that, I think, was what was beguiling initially to Molina. But it was also, a unit of the Communist Party. And this really came back to haunt Molina after World War II. During World War II, he and Aerojet and we'll go into Xu Shenqian, this Chinese theoretical physicist who also suffered after World War II from persecution by the FBI.
Yeah.
But everything changed once World War II was over and the Soviet Union was no longer our ally. And the pressure on someone like Frank Molina ramped up as during, before and during the McCarthy period.
And Sheehan, as you mentioned, also accused of communism, probably less evidence even for him being a communist, but he was detained for 5 years, deported to China, where he goes and starts China's, rocketry program, nuclear weapons program. Talk about that hypocrisy. And at the same time, the U.S. is welcoming these Nazi scientists with open arms.
Well, absolutely. I was also going to say that the FBI does seem a little doofus-like around the persecution of this man with ties to nationalists, not Chinese communists. And they also seemed a little bit bungling and doofus-like in their handling of Frank Molina. He fled to Paris. And I definitely want to get into the irony of the homegrown talent, aerospace talent, being ignored in favor of the Nazis. But the trajectory of Molina's life is so amazing. The FBI is really after him. There are like handwritten notes in his FBI file from Hoover saying, "Get Molina," essentially. He moves to Paris to work for UNESCO. The FBI closes in even more. And there are accusations of UNESCO harboring communists. So Molina retires from there. He can't work in aerospace. He has no security clearance because he refused to, or he not refused to, but he managed to elude taking a personnel security questionnaire, which includes the question, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? But he has to resign. He doesn't have to, but he resigns from UNESCO, where he had been working in Paris. The agents are closing in on him. It's the end of Act 2 in the movie. Things are really bad, and you don't see any way things can be fixed. But then, miraculously, General Tire buys Aerojet, and Molina becomes a millionaire.
The millionaire communist.
Right. It's so beautifully ironic. Who wants to be a millionaire communist? So the French lose interest in chasing him because they realize they could tax him. And he goes on to have a second career as a kinetic artist. He had always been interested in visual art. And he founds a magazine, Leonardo, about the interface between technology and art. And the magazine exists, to this day.
Yeah.
Based, I think, at MIT.
Yeah, a number of these organizations he started, the International Aeronautics Association, Leonardo, Aerojet, JPL, still functioning today in all these different fields. It's like a tragic story of what happened to Frank Molina and also Jack Parsons, who of course died in an explosion on Orange Grove in Pasadena in 1952. Jack Parsons is more well known than Frank Molina, but still not as well known as like a Werner von
As
Braun.
Werner von Braun, that SS officer. Just
Exactly.
don't even get me started.
Yeah.
That's
That's a tragic story.
Yeah, Operation. Well, one reason I think, or one of the reasons why I wanted to be part of the podcast was to, try and make more people aware of Frank Molina and his really important contribution, as well as Xu Shen Chen, or Chen Shushen, who, who was also kind of, well, he was kicked to the side by history, but I think by US history, but I think he ultimately got the last laugh since, we're now competing in a new sort of space race with China. And without him, the Chinese wouldn't have gotten in on the ground floor of rocketry.
Blood, Sweat, and Rockets was season 1 of this LA Made podcast. Or are you working on another project with them?
Well, I am, my other area of, my other paradoxical area of expertise is history of the Barbie doll.
We'll check out that second podcast when it comes out. Everyone should also go listen to the Blood, Sweat, and Rockets podcast if you haven't already. And I don't just say that because I was interviewed for it, because as you've heard here, it's a really fascinating story.
Justin,
MG Lord,
we could not have done it without you.
well, thank you. And thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Before we go, here is this month in Pasadena history. It was this month in 1917 when the United States entered World War I on April 6. According to the Pasadena Museum of History, Pasadena residents supported volunteer and humanitarian relief efforts before and during the war. They volunteered for the American Field Service Ambulance Corps in France, alongside British and Canadian troops. They helped send food and medical supplies to the front via the greater LA chapter of the American Red Cross. And they organized the all-volunteer Pasadena Ambulance Company No. 1 to support the war effort. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of Pasadena Monthly. Tune in every fourth Friday of the month at 5 p.m. Learn more at pasadenamedia.org and justindouglaschapman.com. Drop me a line at jchapman@cityofpasadena.net. See you next time.